Hi, my name's Ann Thomas, and I'm the founder of Transgender Talent, and this is a video about the history of Hollywood, as I call it. It's actually more like the history of activism in Hollywood. In the 1940s, during World War II, the most popular radio show that was for a drama, or one of the most popular, I should say, was about a man and wife. And when World War II ended, we had this new medium of television start up. And CBS approached one of the same biggest show, and asked them if they would like to bring their show to the new medium of television. And they were anxious, of course, to do that. They loved the idea, but the woman of the couple depicted said, "No, I don't want to do that without my real husband playing my husband on the TV show." The CBS balked at that and said, "We don't think that would work because you're like a red-blooded American girl and your real husband is of Cuban descent and speaks with an accent." They were a multi-ethnic marriage as defined by the U.S. Census. And so they decided to take their show on the road and disprove this idea that they were not properly going to be accepted by the American public. So they made a lounge act out of it, and they toured the United States, sold out every show, had very great reviews in every media that they were covered in, and then they went back to CBS and presented all this data, all these newspaper clippings, and CBS couldn't say no at that point. They finally relented and said, "Okay, well, let's go ahead and do your show then the way you like." There was many other aspects to this that were groundbreaking as well, not just the fact that they were multi-ethnic. But amazingly enough, they started airing the show in 1950, and it was I Love Lucy. And they quickly shot to the top of the ratings. They even beat out the presidential inauguration for Eisenhower one year, with a much higher number of viewers. At one point they had 11 million viewers out of the 15 million television sets in the country. So that shows you how big of a penetration they had into the marketplace at the time. What happened though with them was, because they were multi-ethnic, and in some people's estimation interracial, they basically started an avalanche of people saying, "Well, we're multi-ethnic too, and we want to get married," and so they did, including the Loving couple, who in 1958 went to District of Columbia to get married because their home state of Virginia did not permit it, and so it was illegal there. So, as you all know the history of that, they ended up getting arrested. They ended up fighting all the way to the Supreme Court and winning in 1967. The interesting part of this is, what else happened in 1967? Well, that's about the time that rioting started happening regarding the LGBT community. The LGBT community began in 67, 68, 69 with a series of riots. There was the Compton Cafeteria riot in San Francisco area. There was the Black Cat riots in Los Angeles. I think one of them might have been in 1966 actually, but it was around that time. And then in 1969, the very famous Stonewall riot in New York City. So by that time, the riots were about police mishandling of the LGBT community, spearheaded by the trans community, because we're the most visible. I mean, let's face it, a gay or lesbian or bisexual person has a much easier time hiding the fact that that's what their sexuality is than a trans person who dresses up as the opposite gender. There are some lesbians, there are some gay people who have non-binary expression, but they can go back to their original form very much easier than a trans person can, and hide in plain sight. Trans people have a hard time with that. So, what happened was, they, by the end of '69, they realized this is really a systemic problem within the culture of the United States. So, what can we do to fix this? And the gay community looked at the effects that I Love Lucy had and said, oh, TV can do that. And why? Because TV has, for a TV series, has the same character coming into your living room week after week. And audiences fall in love with them. And so, if we can get an audience to fall in love with an LGBT person, particularly a gay person in this case, then maybe the hearts and minds of Americans will change towards us, just like they did towards interracial marriage. So, that's what they decided to do in the early 70s. They started going into Hollywood, many of them did, anywhere they could. They started out as production assistants, as background actors, as just the very bottom entry-level jobs, the low pay, long hours, or even just part-time work. And they started working their way up. It took them decades to get anywhere. So they got to the top of Hollywood, and they started being able to make the true impact that they needed to in the show content, and affect change with the scripts, with the casting, and so on. That's when you started seeing things like Will and Grace and The Ellen Show and many others start to come along that would have a big impact. Prior to that, and in between times, you saw shows that helped depict race that way, like The Jeffersons and many others that were major, major shows that made a huge impact on the representation of a minority. So it was all a progression of change. So what happened was, as these mainly gay guys worked their way to the top and literally started permeating Hollywood anywhere they could, and realized there isn't that many in Hollywood, but there's a lot, and they became, popularized where people are like, oh, we have to have a gay person on our crew or on our cast because they're so creative and so energetic. So that was awesome. That really helped a lot. But then they got to the top and they realized, okay, we've won the right for people to have sex with whomever they want to through, I think it was a Supreme Court case that settled in like 2003 of all things. Prior to that, it was illegal for two people with the same genitalia to have sex together. And then it was a couple of years ago that what's called gay marriage was legalized, although really that's genderless marriage, or which affects the trans community just as much as the gay community. That all happened, and they kind of looked at each other and said, well, what are we going to do now? We've kind of got all this power amassed in Hollywood. Where are we going to go with it? So they decided to start helping their trans brothers and sisters. So if you dig down deep into the roots of many of the early shows that properly depicted trans people, you'll find that, and by early shows I mean, a few years ago, take a look at I Am Kate, the executive producer of that. One of them was Jeff Old. Jeff is a big supporter of us. Another one that's very major, obviously, is Ryan Murphy, who's done Pose. Before that, he did a whole bunch of stuff on Glee, and so he's obviously a big supporter. There's many other behind-the-scenes people that I've come across in Hollywood that are huge supporters of the trans people there. And that's why I'm having success, is because I got connected with them. I got spotted by them, and they realized that what I'm trying to do is affect the change in Hollywood the Hollywood way. It was only like even a couple of weeks ago that SAG, somebody at major at SAG wrote me an email thanking me for doing what I do that way. That it will actually make an effect, but it's going to take a really long time to do it. It's not going to be overnight. Back in the Obama administration, when I first started this, people were thinking, oh, we'll change Americans overnight. And I kept saying, no, give it 10 or 20 years maybe. And they were like, oh, how can you be so negative about that? Well, there's a big problem with that. No matter how much information you give certain people, they will never change their minds. And the problem is, it's always the older generations that control this country. Pretty much. And so it's always been that way. So you have to look at the people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s who are actually running things to see and look at their attitudes to determine what happens legally and legislatively regarding trans people, and judicially too. So they're going to have to go away or be outnumbered by younger people. So that's why I'm saying 10 to 20 years. But with good support from within Hollywood, we can bring a better representation to those people in the middle of the road, not the staunch on either end of the spectrum. Their minds are made up. It's the middle of the road people that we're trying to reach, and that's what we're trying to do with representation in Hollywood. So that's a brief history of Hollywood. One last footnote on that. Not all gay people are supportive of trans people in Hollywood. There's been plenty of examples I've seen of that. But then there's so many that are, that it's like, why would I bite the hand that feeds me? I don't come against any, even the ones who don't like me or don't like trans people in general. It doesn't matter. They're vastly outnumbered by those who do. So that's to give you guys a basic overview of where I am, where I came from, how I got to where I am, and how we all got to where we are, and the support that we have in Hollywood, which is actually far greater than most people realize. So, have a good day.